Hey guys, we're wrapping up the first week of November 2025. It's Evan with Evan K Exotic, and today's video is discussing what I think is better options for starting breeding projects: wild-caught genetics or captive genetics. And this is a little bit of a different video than should you get a wild-caught animal, because I've covered that, and I think that a lot of people have those ideas. But a less common perspective is, should you be building your breeding projects off of wild-caught animals, or should you be breeding them off of captive bred animals? So that's what this video is going to be about today. But other than that, I'm just going to ask you guys, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm also going to mention to you guys that I'm on Morph Market under the same name, Evan K Exotic. So if you search my store, you'll find it there. I actually sold out this season. I'm getting my last packages out before the winter shipping pause, but then I'll be back around in February, March, posting some of the more cold tolerant species and get them out to you guys. So thank you very much. If you bought something from me, it was a really great year for me. And if you are interested in the future, please go ahead and follow me on Morph Market, because that's where everything's going to be flowing to. But beyond that, I guess I'd like to say that I see value in having both wild-caught genetics and captive bred genetics in your breeding stock. And I have both in my breeding stock, and one of the reasons why I'm making this video is because I'm pairing a wild-caught animal to a female that I've bred before. And so it's just a good way to think about it. And for me, I see two primary values in getting wild-caught stock. The first one is that you're gaining very different genetics than what's in your collection, and very different than what's flying around in captivity. At least I think on a national level, like in America, I think that a lot of these highly worked with species have very close genetics relatively, even across the nation. So I think the vast majority of like Argentine boas, things like that, can be traced back to a select few. I think the vast majority of certain populations of BCC and locality boas and things like that can be searched back. A lot of this is just for political realities. We can't get more ones in, so it's kind of moot. But so if you want to bring in novel genetics, which I think is something that you should be doing, I don't necessarily think it's something you should be focusing on your first couple of breedings, just because you can't have too close of genetics if you've only bred a couple of times. But once you start getting into projects, you should be indexing in novel genetics, either from outside sources that are captive bred or from wild-caught. And wild-caught is going to represent the most different genetics from captive genetics that you can find. So that's an advantage of wild-caught. The other advantage of wild-caught I can see is that if you identify an individual that has some really interesting trait you want to perpetuate. The classic example is morphs. So with morphs, people find a wild-caught animal that has a trait that they want, that's desirable, and they want to perpetuate, and so they bring it in and they isolate the gene and they work with the morph and they perpetuate it. But you can do that with an animal that has any look, even if it's not a single gene morph. You can find that animal, work with that animal, and try to perpetuate and propagate that certain look. So if you find a wild-caught animal that has a specific look, so that would be another reason to bring in wild-caught. But overall, that has to be on balance with all the risks, the challenges, and the extra time it takes to work with a wild-caught animal. So you have to understand that you're more likely to get a sick animal that doesn't do well and established. You're less likely to get one that gets to the point of breeding. You're more likely to bring in something that's going to make the rest of your animals sick if you do that. And you just have to balance all the advantages of the wild-caught genetics with the captive bred, with the risks. But that being said, the vast majority of my pairings and the vast majority of my projects and the vast majority of my breedings going forward will always start with animals that came from captive bred origins. And that's just because right now, most of the animals that we see and we should be buying are captive bred animals. The really excellent examples of most species are captive bred animals. The other thing to think about, other than just the fact that it's going to be more well established and acclimated to captivity and generally healthier, is that when you're buying captive genetics, you're buying genetics that have already been worked with to some degree, meaning that at the very least somebody found two animals that they thought were desirable and wanted to propagate, and they propagated them, and by that breeding they've made more appropriate captives, and they've enhanced whatever, or further refined and line bred whatever trait they were looking for. So that's a very light example. All the way up to a very heavy example would be buying into a well-known line like Max Pink or something like that. If you buy into a Max Pink boa constrictor, you're buying into 30 plus years of somebody else's work perpetuating a line, and if you find it desirable, you're getting a head start on that by buying for captive bred genetics. So the point being is that captive bred animals are oftentimes more desirable, not only from their health metrics but also from their appearance metrics, because they've come from stock that was already identified as being desirable and then they've perpetuated and try to propagate and enhance that. So you can start from on the shoulders of somebody else's work by getting with captive bred stock. So, you know, another example like this that I've seen change since they became really popular in the hobby are jungle carpet pythons. You can't get wild-caught jungle carpet pythons anymore, at least easily. I don't know what the politics on that and laws are exactly, but if you look at the animals that were being produced, the jungle carpet pythons that were being produced 25 years ago, versus the ones that are being produced now, you will always pick the ones that were produced now because they've just really worked to enhance the genetics and the look of that animal. And so that's kind of a classic example of if you were able to get a couple of wild-caught jungle carpet pythons and you pair them together versus a couple of the average captive bred jungle carpet pythons, and you compared the results of those litters, I think you'd be happier and more satisfied with the results of the captive bred litter, just because, for all the reasons I talked about, that is the genetics have already been refined and isolated and worked with, and the desirable parts have been enhanced. So I think that's the reason why you would find that preferable. So that's my big thoughts on what you should be doing with your founding stock. Is there is a spot for wild-caught genetics, but the vast majority of your animals and your breedings are probably, or at least mine do, they come from captive bred stock, especially with animals where those are widely available. So that's just my 2 cents. Take care. Have a good day. Bye-bye.